Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco socialist Green New Deal program that we ran on in 2020. So this week, more bad news. On Wednesday, the House voted 216 to 210 against two measures to stop this war against Venezuela. One was to stop blowing up these drug boats, so-called drug boats, in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. And that was the 216 to 210 vote. And then 213 to 211, a vote against land strikes in Venezuela. So this follows up on the Senate voting 51 to 49 against the bill to stop the war in Venezuela. So basically, Trump has no restrictions from the Congress. So keep your eyes on that. It looks like we're going deeper into war, escalating the war against Venezuela. And then meanwhile, in Palestine, Israel's breaking the ceasefire every day. Hundreds of Gazans have been killed during the ceasefire. Humanitarian aid is not getting in anywhere near the quantities needed for food, water, shelter, and medicine. The Rafah border crossing with Egypt is still closed. That's not only blocking massive amounts of aid waiting to go in, but it's blocking Palestinians from leaving to get urgent medical care or students who have scholarships to study abroad. I mean, the genocide continues, and we got to keep calling for arms embargo on Israel. That's one thing we can demand. And as I've talked about before, we got a long way to go with the Congress, but we need to keep pushing. And then in Ukraine, the negotiations continue to be a farce. Ukraine is ready to accept the ceasefire. It has been by freezing the front lines where they are and willing to accept non-NATO status if they're provided security guarantees. I mean, this has been, the security guarantees question has been, the top of Ukraine's, what it needs from the West since 1991 when it got independence, the Budapest memorandums, when they gave up their nuclear weapons in 1994. The early negotiations right after the full-scale invasion started, that was the sticking point. And it still is. And then Russia, on the other hand, is still demanding that Ukraine give them the rest of Donetsk province and the 250,000 people who live there. And they're rejecting any security guarantees provided by Western militaries. And yesterday, I mean, Putin upped the ante again at his annual press conference, where he referenced the June 24 demands that he put out there, in which Ukraine must not only give up the rest of Donetsk, but the rest of Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson provinces or oblasts. So, Putin's just playing the U.S. along, and the U.S. has been siding with Russia. It's hoping to carve up Ukraine with Russia and start doing business and making money together again. It's put all its pressure on Ukraine, not on Russia. The U.S. ended military, economic, and humanitarian aid when Trump came into office. There's still some remnants of military aid and in terms of intelligence sharing and allowing Europe to buy weapons they can pass on to Ukraine. And then in terms of Russia, Trump has threatened sanctions, even said he has sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft, they're two big oil companies, but they haven't put the secondary sanctions on, as promised on November 21st, on oil buyers of Russian oil. So, that was just talk. And it's clear Putin wants Ukraine more than he wants business deals, let alone peace. In fact, we have a story out yesterday from Reuters citing 6 intelligence sources within the intelligence community of the United States. And their assessment is that Putin wants all the countries of the old Soviet empire. We'll put a link to the chat in that. of that article. There it is. Now, you're not going to hear this from Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, but I take this reporting seriously. I mean, U.S. intelligence was right in 2021 that Putin was getting ready to invade Ukraine. Not getting ready, well, getting ready, everybody could see that, was going to invade Ukraine. And many people across the political spectrum, me included, just thought Putin was not going to do something so obviously outside the bounds of international law and norms, and that it was just trying to pressure Ukraine. But he did it. And U.S. intelligence was right about that. So I take this report seriously. Putin, I think, wants to restore the Russian Empire, and he's playing Trump with these negotiations. And another reason to take this report seriously is that Russia is now the most militarized major power in the world. 40% of its state budget is being spent on the military. Compare that to the militaristic United States, which is 13%. Russia has transformed its economy into a war economy, and military production is growing at the expense of domestic production and public services. So I don't think Russian aggression is going to be stopped until it's stopped by the Ukraine military when it gets the weapons it needs, and there's international sanctions, particularly oil and gas sanctions, which provide about 40% of the revenues to the Russian government. So meanwhile, I want to talk about Sudan, which doesn't get talked about enough. The scale of violence and deprivation caused by the civil war in Sudan is greater than Ukraine and Gaza combined. There are up to 400,000 people dead. 12 million are refugees, and 24 million people are malnourished. And the damn world community cannot even provide enough funding to feed those people. And the Sudanese civil war is a proxy war with outside powers backing the rival factions of the military regime. One side is backed by the United Arab Emirates. That's the Rapid Support Forces, which is one faction of the Sudan's armed forces. And the UAE is interested in the gold, agriculture, and geopolitical influence for its moderate Islamic politics against Islamist fundamentalist groups that are backed by Saudi Arabia. So there's a rivalry there between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And on the other side is Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Russia, who are backing the Sudanese armed forces. Egypt obviously wants stability because they depend so much on the Nile River water that flows through Sudan. Red Sea shipping is important to them, and so instability in Sudan affects that. Saudi Arabia also wants stability in the Red Sea and access to agriculture and mineral resources. And a Sunni Islamic geopolitical ally against Iranian Shiite influence. And then Russia wants a naval base at Port Sudan on the Red Sea and gold concessions. And Russia has been hedging its bets, supplying arms to both sides, but last year came down more on the Sudanese armed forces because they promised if they prevail, they're going to give Russia that naval base at Port Sudan. So the U.S. is not providing arms directly, and it could play a constructive role. Right now, there are negotiations, they call it the Quad, U.S., Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Now, all these countries are U.S. allies, but the problem is they're mediating between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese armed forces, and they're leaving out the civilian popular organizations that made a revolution in 2018 and overthrew the former government of Omar al-Bashir. So what the Quad is calling for is a ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and transition to civilian government, but they don't include the civilians. And the Sudanese armed forces have rejected this because they say the UAE, which backs the Rapid Support Forces, is part of the Quad. And the Sudanese armed forces want to keep a military dictatorship, not democratic civilian rule. So, the U.S. could insist that the civilian organizations be included, but it hasn't done that. And as I mentioned, in the 2018-2019 revolution, they overthrew, the former dictator, Omar al-Bashir. It was a nonviolent revolution of mass protests, civil disobedience, and strikes. And it was led by a broad coalition called the Forces of Freedom and Change, which consisted of leftist political parties, trade unions, women's groups, and most importantly, neighborhood resistance committees, which really gave that revolution its popular grassroots character. And in 2019, they won an agreement with the military and what was called the Transitional Military Council after al-Bashir was overthrown. And so it was a joint council of the Forces for Freedom and Change and the Transitional Military Council. And for 2 years, the military kept pushing to get the upper hand. And then finally in October 2021, they just broke the agreement and had a military coup and took all the power and kicked out the civilian popular forces. And then in April 2023, the military, broke into two factions, the RSF and the SAF, Rapid Support Forces and Sudanese Armed Forces, and started this civil war. The real transition or solution and transition to democracy has to disarm and neutralize both the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces, which means arms embargoes that the U.S. Could, use its influence to get its allies, Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the UAE, to enforce. The U.S. can't tell Russia what to do, but that would go a long way toward sending the message that, the civil war needs to end. And they could empower the popular organizations by bringing them into the negotiations. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen with Trump. He hates Africans. He doesn't care about Sudan. And anyway, the UAE's already bought off Trump with its $2 billion investment in its cryptocurrencies. So Trump is not going to stop arms sales to the UAE. They get passed on to the Rapid Support Forces. A few Democrats in Congress have issued hand-wringing statements about the RSF genocide in Darfur and called for stopping arms sales to the UAE. But they don't say anything about Egyptian, Saudi, or Russian arms. And none of them are calling for the Sudanese pro-democracy movement that is, the Forces of Freedom and Change to be included in the negotiations. So, in other words, these Democrats may be wringing their hands, but they're not in solidarity with the popular democratic revolution in Sudan. And that's where the Green Party should be stepping up. So this is a crisis that needs more attention, and that's why I'm talking about it. So let's turn to domestic policy. Yesterday, the Epstein files were only partially released by DOJ. They were supposed to be fully released by law. And of course, this partial release has only increased in massive redactions, page after page, totally blacked out. That has only increased suspicions that Trump is hiding something. It also has me worried that Trump is going to escalate the war in Venezuela to divert attention from the Epstein files. So, let's keep our eye on that. Everybody's talking about that on the mass media, but there's other things to talk about that are worth noting. One thing I want to talk about this week is that Marjorie Taylor Greene got her anti-trans bill passed that bans any kind of pediatric transition care of any kind for trans people, young people. And, that's why I find it so disgusting that, people like Medea Benjamin have been left-washing bigots like Marjorie Taylor Greene with tweets of support for her supposed anti-war position. There's a link to the tweet, and you see Medea grinning next to Marjorie Taylor Greene. I just find that disgusting. We should not be, whitewashing or left-washing or peace-washing bigots like Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's notorious for her immigrant, anti-Latino, anti-Black, and anti-trans bigotry. I wouldn't want to be seen anywhere near her. So she got her bill passed on Wednesday, and it makes any such pediatric care for trans youth a federal felony, punishable by up to a decade in prison. Now, it probably won't pass in the Senate, but the Trump administration's already moving on this. RFK Jr. and Health and Human Services and Dr. Oz, unbelievable. He's heading the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, have already promulgated new rules saying that any hospital that provides pediatric transition care to trans youth will lose its Medicaid and Medicare funding, which means, that's very important to hospitals because so much of the coverage is covered by Medicare and Medicaid. And these bigots aren't going to stop there. Their goal is to ban any kind of transition care for trans people, adults as well as youth. And they're using myths to scare people into supporting their mean-spirited and, in fact, deadly policies. These policies will lead to even higher rates of suicides in a trans population that already has a very high rate. One of these myths is that transgender women will use women's bathrooms to sexually assault women. Well, that doesn't happen. I mean, a man posing as a woman, could just as easily do it, but doing it in a public bathroom, is not likely to happen because other people come in there, you get caught. So it's absurd. The other myth is that transgender women are taking over women's sports. And sports leagues that still allow, and a lot of them don't, allow trans competitors, they require some proof of having undergone hormone therapy. And studies demonstrate that this therapy largely erodes any physical advantage from undergoing male puberty. And in any case, the numbers of transgender women involved here are tiny. Only one person has ever competed in the Olympics. It was weightlifting, and she didn't do very well. And then last year, there were fewer than 10 trans athletes in all of American college sports. And all of them were, they were average female athletes, college athletes, but none of them were stars. So this is another, scare myth that they're using to go after trans people. And, one thing the Green Party has had a good position on, they've been exemplary in defending trans rights, and that needs to continue because the Democrats, they may take the right position when they have to vote, but they're not going to talk about it. And that's why we need the Green Party. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the Eco-Socialist Green New Deal. There's a poll that came out. There are a couple articles on the trans, the bill that let's get into the chat. Yeah, there's one of them from American Prospect. There's another interview from Democracy Now! That we'll get up there that'll give you more background on that information. So obviously Trump is accelerating climate change in every way he can think of. I mean, on day one, he issued numerous executive orders revoking many climate-related policies and regulations. He declared a national energy emergency, which allowed him to suspend climate policies and regulations. He withdrew from the Paris Agreement. He didn't participate in, or the U.S. didn't send a delegation to the UN Climate Summit in Brazil last month for this year. He revoked environmental justice executive orders. He's removed all references to climate change by the Environmental Protection Agency on its website and all communications. Trump's budget eliminated EPA funding for the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, which has been crucial for climate research and measuring atmospheric carbon dioxide levels since 1958. It's those measurements that they use globally. And I happen to have a cousin whose late husband worked at that observatory. It's a vital service, and they're eliminating the funding for it. And I got about 10 more things Trump did, but you get the picture. He's promoting fossil fuel extraction and use in every way he can to accelerate climate change. It's crazy. More concerning or maybe surprising is that the European Parliament is stepping back from climate policy. It's under pressure from the far right white nationalist parties in Europe, the anti-immigrant policies, also from its trading partners, the US, Russia, and China, to roll back on climate legislation. So the European Parliament voted this week to delay for another year its ban on imported goods linked to deforestation. And it introduced this week a bill to repeal the ban on the production of gas and diesel-powered cars by 2035. That's something Trump has done. California's instituted that. Some other states have, and he's made it a federal violation to do that. The powers that be are accelerating climate change. Meanwhile, we have a very interesting study published by the Lancet Planetary Health publication that found that people want radical climate change. What I've been talking about, an eco-socialist Green New Deal. 72% of Americans, 82% of Brits support an eco-socialist transformation when it's described as scaling down damaging and unnecessary production and consumption, what's sometimes called degrowth, cutting the purchasing power of the rich and reducing inequality, establishing universal public services and a public job guarantee to reorganize production around needs. That's what I've called the Economic Bill of Rights as part of a eco-socialist Green New Deal. Democratizing control over finance and the means of production. That's socialism right there. And ending imperialist exploitation of the global South through unequal exchange. In other words, fair trade. And the people are with us on this. An interesting thing, the survey asked what kind of labels people would like for this kind of proposal. And degrowth scored the lowest. Eco-socialism scored in the middle, kind of half and half. And there's the article that will tell you about this study by Jason Hickel in the chat. And then calling it the well-being economy scored the highest, although that's kind of vague, and Trump can say he's for the well-being economy. I wish they'd asked about labeling it the Green New Deal. From other studies, we know that it's, got well over 60% support in the United States still, after all the, attacks it's got from the right and the retreat from it by Democrats like Biden and Harris. So the people are ready. Are the Greens ready to provide the political organizing and leadership to give the people what they want? The opportunity is there for the Green Party. It's up to us to do the organizing that's needed. So, the people are ready for what the Greens are offering. Can we organize to make it happen? So I'll leave it there and hear what you got to say. Scott 164 or 106. Howie, I saw a Secular Talk video where billionaires are buying islands to escape the U.S., likely after the money has run out, or even planning to build things underwater to make private cities. This shit is directly out of BioShock, where Andrew Ryan flat out built an underwater city because he believed the world was filled with parasites and that wanted to control everything they wanted. Thing is, Ryan refused to compromise on ideals and refused to fund social programs and often bashed the poor, leading to gangster Frank Fontaine to control the poor by pretending to care. This led to civil war and the downfall of the city in terms of a summarized bit of lore. But regardless, if these billionaires do this, many of the same problems will be in those cities. If these billionaires continuing making their private cities, do you feel this will ultimately be a natural disaster? Not just because we have to take care of the mess they left behind, but their greed. Also, I've gotten exhausted and burnout from politics, so I will not be watching any for days. I may be around for one or two live streams, but I don't want my health to worsen with anger. Well, science fiction, has been predictive. The rich are, buying their islands. I don't know if anybody's trying to build an underground city yet. They're certainly building gated communities. They do fear the rest of us. They know that we have the votes and we could tax them, and they're militantly opposed to that. But the way to, I think, avoid burnout from politics is to work together with other people and, pace yourself and, just keep plugging away. And, I've lived long enough to see many movements where we seem to be just beating our heads against brick walls, suddenly break through. That whether it's stopping the Vietnam War, putting a 36-year moratorium on nuclear power plants, stopping the World Trade Organization at the Battle in Seattle in 1999, getting fracking banned in New York. I mean, I think that was the one I had the least optimism about, but the people stood up, and I got a decent vote running for governor in 2014. And Andrew Cuomo, crooked as he is, had to realize the political realities. And so he, moved to his left on that issue, and living wage and family leave for children, and funding the public schools that he was opposed to before the election. So, you may not feel like you're making progress, but you're winning people over. And at some point, we break through. And so, you just got to, work together with your comrades and keep plugging away. And then, the victories will come. So don't get burned out. Don't overwork. Take heart in like that poll I just cited, that the people want an equal socialist Green New Deal, even if they don't call it equal socialist. They want the substance, and that's where we come in, and where we can, there's the link again. That's where it ought to make us optimistic and hopeful. Vicky Corden, any thoughts on the revocation of U.S. citizenship for naturalized citizens, $100 to $200 a month? Yeah, this is just mean-spirited. I don't think it's legal. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know, what they go into court to do to get these revocations. But I mean, it's, the U.S. needs immigrants, because of our aging population. There are positions that the immigrants are willing to take that Americans are not, or there are not enough of us to take. I think I've mentioned on this podcast how ICE and Border Patrol raided a nutrition bar factory near Syracuse. And now it turns out they didn't have the warrant they claimed to have had to do what they did in the factory. And the one guy who's taken them to, or maybe it was a woman, who took them to court, has had the judge, restore her legal status in the United States. So we got to fight this. And, the Trump MAGA people are just, when they say make America great again, they mean make America white again. That's what that fascist Stephen Miller's all about. It's what, they're all about in the national security strategy that the Trump administration just promulgated when they support these far-right anti-immigrant, anti-climate action parties in Europe. That's about making Europe white again. That's the national security strategy with respect to Europe. It's something we got to fight. I think American people are coming around. They, were persuaded that, people were flooding the borders and that, but when they see how they're going after people who are working hard, abiding by the law and just violating their rights, all kinds of people who thought they were anti-immigrant are coming around. So I think that's another reason to be hopeful, but we got to keep resisting this. I mean, that's a centerpiece of the Trump administration. And the conflicts over that, on the streets is what Trump may use to invoke the Insurrection Act and sending the military into our cities and disrupting the 2026 midterms. It's really serious. And this is like the head of the wedge for the Trump right-wing project. Scott 164, Trump's speech was a complete joke. That speech just screamed, I can't be a bad guy. He had nothing. And honestly, I'm bored as fuck listening to him. Yeah, how did I see it described today? The people that still follow Trump, I forget exactly how they put it, but it was apt. But, they're like a cult. They're just like anything he does, they're going to believe, because they stopped thinking for themselves and just putting all their faith in this one guy. And fortunately, they're a minority. So I think a reckoning is coming now. If not with all the crazy stuff happening around the Epstein files and the revulsion at the war in Venezuela, which I think it's something like 70% of the American public doesn't want. And, the reckoning coming in 2026. And if, Trump really tries to steal that election, I think it's just going to open up eyes more, and people are going to resist that. So, Trump is becoming pathetic. I always thought he was a clown, but now he's a pathetic clown. Scott 164, Howie, what is your response to Fox News advocating for fake Christmas trees? Ironically, they started their war on Christmas just so they can protect data centers. I'm not following you here. I don't watch Fox News very often. I tune in once in a while to see what they're talking about. It's always immigration, seems. So they're advocating for fake Christmas trees. I don't get the connection to data centers. Are they saying they want the electricity to go to data centers? I don't know. They claim that people out of nowhere want a war on Christmas, mainly leftists. Well, that's an old thing. That guy, he got fired from Fox News eventually, but he's still around. Oh, I can't remember his name. He was one of their prime time guys, and every year he'd say the left, by which he meant the Democrats, have a war on Christmas. And, it was ridiculous. And so I guess it's Christmas season, so they're trotting out that shibboleth again. In fact, it's due to the fact that they want data centers, and they're likely wanting to keep on going with them, even as data centers demolish forests and shit. So they're saying we should settle for fake, artificial Christmas trees because they're going to cut down all the real trees. Oh man, if that's what they're saying, I mean, it's just insanity. I mean, it's hard to believe we got these idiots having major media and running the country. It's I don't think they can sustain this level of idiocy. Most people are beginning to see through it. Scott 164, regarding Putin, what do you think of how he's demanding Russia be treated with respect? It sounds like he's getting angry as fuck with the loss of Kupiansk and Turkey fighting Russian drones. Yeah, for people who don't know, Russia and Putin has claimed for weeks that the Russians encircled the Ukrainian forces and then captured them and took over the city of Kupiansk. And in fact, they didn't. And in fact, President Zelensky went to Kupiansk and did a selfie video saying, "Here I am, Ukraine has it." And then Turkey fighting Russian drones. Russia had used drones to attack some Turkish ships carrying cargo to Ukraine. And the Turks shot down those Russian drones. And the Turks don't mess around. Remember, they shot down a Russian fighter jet that went into Turkish territory several years ago around the Syrian civil war. And Russia, they said, okay. I mean, Turkey is a strong military, and they don't mess around. I mean, they're much more ready to tell Russia to back off than the Europeans are, where there have been a lot of, drones and balloons, and 3 Russian infantry or cops or somebody went into Lithuania the other day. There are all kinds of provocations going on, and the Europeans, they just let the drones fly, but they don't shoot them down, although they did shoot some down in Poland. In any case, Russia, Putin, that's been the whole thing. Russia's the victim, poor Putin. And so he uses that as justification for attacking Ukraine, which is, it's not a good justification to start a war. And, if he wants to be treated with respect, he should deserve respect by his actions. And right now, he doesn't deserve it. All this aggression. It's not just Ukraine. It's Wagner troops, or Wagner, private military company, now called the Africa Corps, official part of Russia, and all the, terrorism and gold concessions they've extracted for providing security for dictators in Africa. Of course, it's the massive bombing of Syria during that civil war, Grozny to subdue the Chechens, early in the, 20 or so years ago. Why nobody should respect that kind of militaristic aggression. The Green Garret. A recent Fox News segment talked about a foresting operation clearing land for data centers and said folks didn't need real Christmas trees. Fake was good for jobs. So yeah, hi Garrett. So you saw the segment. Okay, you just explained it. So yeah, they want to chop down the forests and tell people to get fake Christmas trees. Unbelievable. And then they say the left has a war on Christmas. Unbelievable. Scout 164. The third question is, what is your response to the reveal that 0 jobs have been gained since April? I think I saw a Secular Talk video that revealed that the bad economy about the Trump session. So that's what they're calling it, the Trump session. Yeah, I think the economy is in trouble. I don't know if it's going to crash into a deep dive like it did in 2008. There is reason to fear that, the bubble around artificial intelligence and the tech companies could burst. And that could send the stock market down and then scare off consumption and investment and put us in a real recession or even depression. That kind of stuff is hard to predict. It's like trying to predict the weather 30 days from now. We're pretty good to about 10 days out, but after that, there are just too many variables at play. So, I'm not going to make a prediction, but definitely the economy is, struggling, and the people are beginning to feel it. And so Trump's making the same mistake Biden did. He's saying, don't believe your own experience. Listen to me. The economy's great. Well, if you lost your job or you're looking for a job and it's hard to find one, you don't feel the same way. And for a leader to say, don't believe what you're experiencing is a way to lose the support of people. So, I think that's another area where Trump is not being very smart. But he has no way of, it's just against his character to admit that anything he's in charge of or takes responsibility for is going the wrong way. Scout 164. I think we need to accept the fact that the U.S. is going to take decades before we can finally let go of fascism. Many politicians pushing religion are still here despite founding dads being deists. Yeah, the Christian fundamentalism that says this should be a Christian nation and that's what the founding fathers want. They're, of course, wrong. Many of the founding fathers were deists. And, Jefferson wrote, made his famous Bible where he cut out all the miracles and mystical stuff in the Bible and just left sort of the moral teachings. That was more typical of the founding fathers. Now, I would say that the religious fundamentalism is on decline. It's strong, it's well organized, well funded by the congregants, so it's a force to be reckoned with. But it's declined since what it was, say, in the 1920s when you had the Scopes monkey trials, and the Ku Klux Klan was riding high. I often point out that Nixon and Wallace together got over, I think, 62% of the vote in '68. And today, Trump's hardcore vote is maybe 35%. So that hard far-right racist, Dixiecrat, white supremacist sector of the American population is on decline. Now, for it to completely, go into the dustbins of history, yeah, it may take decades, but I think, they are a political minority and becoming more and more so. So I'm optimistic in the long run. That's not to say, they do have real power in the federal government now and many state governments, and we got to resist that. Scout 164, for my last question. I saw a thumbnail that said Trump is now being forced to release medical records because a lawsuit he tried to pull off backfired. With the censorship for Epstein, do I have thoughts? I'm not familiar with the lawsuit. He seems to have backfired on him. I guess it's a Freedom of Information Act kind of thing that wants his medical records released. Maybe, I don't know. Is it Congress that's asking for this, with its oversight function? And with the censorship for Epstein, yeah, Trump is hiding stuff. And, the one thing I'll give him credit for, he does go before the press all the time. Unlike anybody, any president we've had, far more than Trump, Biden, obviously, much more than Obama or the Bushes or anybody I can think of, which, does give the press to ask regular questions, although Trump's answers are kind of silly sometimes. But now he's hiding stuff. And that's not his brand, which is, partly what sells him to his followers. So, I think that says he's in trouble. Scout 164 says he thinks it was the Pulitzer Prize board that was asking for the medical records. And he says they're asking Florida court to compel Trump to hand those over. Now, the Pulitzer Prize board, I know they're in conflict with Trump. I'm trying to remember. Trump is suing. Is he suing them for, yeah, you said he sued them, for giving an award to somebody Trump doesn't like. I can't remember right now, but it's ringing bells. Yeah, there's so much going on, it's hard to keep up. The Green Garrett, do you think there's any momentum for building Medicare for all, or even a better national health, or even better, a national health service, now that the ACA, Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare subsidies seem set to expire in January? How can the Greens lead on this? Yes, I think I posted last week an article I wrote about why we need a national health service, not just national health insurance, which is what Medicare for all would be. And I think what prompted that was, the Congress not failing to vote to renew the ACA subsidies. So people are now going to be hit with premiums that are going to be 2 or 3 times what they've been paying. They'll have, if they keep the insurance, they may have to go for insurance that really doesn't insure them. It's a disaster. And yeah, you wonder why the progressive Democrats aren't, jumping up on this. I mean, Sanders talks about it more than any of them, and I haven't heard a lot about it from him either, because I guess they're focused on getting the ACA subsidies renewed. But how can the Greens lead on this? We bring it into races for the House. Those are, a scale at which a good Green campaign can at least make this an issue that the major party candidates have to debate. And if they have to debate it, the Green candidate's going to win that debate if they know what they're doing. So I think that's a way for the Greens to lead. And in those states where there is a single payer national or state health insurance, universal state health insurance proposal, you can campaign on that. I think Butch Ware is doing that in California. It remains to be seen whether you can get much traction in that jungle primary with about 15 candidates. But, that's a place where it definitely should be raised, and he's doing that. So that's, I think, a way we can lead on it. I mean, what we're doing here in New York is we're doing a series of community meetings. We're doing one here in Syracuse about the need. We have a New York Health Act, which is a single payer state health insurance plan, to just do public education. And we'll be doing that as Greens in coalition with others. So, those kind of public education events is, I think, where we need to start. And if we got good candidates, they need to make it a central issue, particularly House candidates. Scout 164. Okay, so I partially brought this up before, but what I want to ask, is there a possibility China could try to take over Serbia from Russia by migrating people over, give them a harbor and water? Well, did you say Serbia or Siberia? I think you meant Siberia, if I'm not mistaken. Well, that part of that part of Russia, in the far west of Russia, was historically Chinese. And so a lot of commentators say, why, China, while Russia's, preoccupied with Ukraine and its western borders, China could make a move there. I don't think they're going to do that now because they got, Russia as a vassal state. Russia sells them oil underpriced, relies on them for parts for its military, and trade for items that Russia can't produce on its own. So I don't think it's going to happen now. Somebody on a guy named Pomenarev, his first name is escaping me. He was a Russian member of the Duma, the state Duma. They're, basically their national Congress. And he was the most left member. In fact, in his last year, he was a member of the Greens in Russia, who have since been, decapitated and taken over by Putin's political machine. But at that time, he was the only guy to vote against the laws against gay rights, calling it an extremist ideology. Or maybe that's feminism, they call it extremist ideology. And he voted against the invasion of Ukraine. Back in 2014, he voted against the annexation of Crimea. And eventually he had to go into exile. And now he's in Ukraine and working with the Ukrainians. And he was on a Ukraine Solidarity Network meeting talking about, and the thing he pointed out was that on that border, the Chinese have an excess of men because of the single child policy. It's like the men outnumber the women, 6-4. And then on the Russian side, because so many men die early or get killed in the war, they have an excess of women. So he was saying that the Chinese men and the Russian women, or say the women living in Siberia, who are not just ethnic Russians, but indigenous peoples who are more closely historically share descendants with the Chinese and the Mongolians. They in fact, he said they are marrying each other. So, China may take over just by marriage. So, that's something to watch. The Chinese and the Russians, despite their everlasting friendship or whatever they call it, have historically been enemies. They've gone to war with each other. The most militarized border for Russia was along the Chinese border until it started this full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And so they've had to move a lot of their troops to their east. So anyway, I don't think China's going to militarily take over, part of Siberia. They're just going to dominate it and, get its minerals, in a neo-colonial fashion rather than, an annexation fashion. Any 2026 predictions for the Greens? 2026. Well, yeah, this is the midterm year. I predict we're going to pretty much, do what we've been doing and run some marginal races for the House, a few serious races. We'll elect people again to local office like we do every year. And I don't see any sign that we're going to do anything more than sort of run in place. Unfortunately, I wish I saw, a strong movement of local organizing, local chapters, and, really seriously trying to take over local governments and have a strategy for doing that. I think that's what we need to do. And from that base, we can then run credible campaigns to get people in state legislatures and the House of Representatives. But I don't see a lot of evidence of that happening with the Greens around the country. We're sort of still doing what we've been doing, unfortunately. Vicky Corden, China might try to take over Taiwan. I hope not. Any thoughts? Yeah, that is a nightmare scenario. One fear is that they're going to do it while Trump is still in office because they don't expect him to resist or aid the Taiwanese that much. On the other hand, elements within the Trump administration are big on the pivot to Asia that goes back to Obama, or a pivot to the Indo-Pacific. I think, militarily, China's more likely to do a blockade of Taiwan than a land invasion and get Taiwan to cry uncle and accept China's terms. A land invasion would cost Chinese a lot. Obviously, the Taiwanese too. I think we need to speak up in defense of Taiwan. It had a pro-democracy revolution in the late 80s. Took, what had been a military dictatorship under Chiang Kai-shek and his successors, and democratized. And as soon as they got democracy in the 80s and the 90s, they set up a Medicare for all system. Why the hell can't we do that in the U.S.? I mean, it's just about every industrial country and many others have some kind of universal public health care system. And so, what Taiwan did to, build a democracy is something that we should be speaking out in defense of. So those are my thoughts. I hope China just, accepts what the international community now recognizes. Taiwan is part of the Chinese state, but it has its own government. And just, let that be. And hopefully China will let it be for a long while going forward. Sky 164. I think you're not entirely wrong, Howie. MAGA is undergoing civil war with Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson at it and whatnot. In what way could MAGA civil war be of benefit to us on the left? Well, it could weaken them. I mean, and that's, good for the progressive side of politics. And I'm not following it closely. I know some of it has to do with what's his name, the guy that got assassinated. And people say he was moving away from support of Israel. Carlson says that. Maybe Nick Fuentes says that's not what he was doing. Charlie Kirk, that's what I was trying to remember. He's the one who was assassinated. And so there's a lot of speculation. He is moving away from support of Israel's war in Gaza. And Tucker Carlson has that same position. I guess Fuentes is the opposite. But, the MAGA base, I'm not sure they're following it that closely. I mean, the MAGA base loves Trump, and they see him on the mass media. They're not tuning into, podcasts by Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes so much. I mean, there's a hardcore that does. So, but to the extent they're, denouncing each other, and that's among the organized cadre of MAGA world, that's good. It means they're more busy, fighting each other for supremacy than trying to carry through their program at a time when they've got, the federal government in their hands, majorities in Congress, the Supreme Court, and Trump into presidency. So, yeah, I think it couldn't hurt us. Okay, well, our hour is up. I appreciate everybody being here. Next week, I don't have a guest scheduled. I did get a note out to Zach Polanski, the leader of the British or the Green Party of England and Wales, asking him to come on at a time convenient for him. I know he's been very busy, and the Green Party of England and Wales is booming. And he's getting a lot of media coverage. So, speaking to us on a smaller podcast is not at the top of his list, but, I met him when I was in London, actually Dublin, where we met last year. And, I'm sure he'll come on when he gets a chance. So that's coming up. And otherwise, this is the week of the Christmas holidays. Congress is on recess. And so that doesn't mean the news is going to stop. I think we got to keep an eye on Venezuela. I think that's the tail that wants to wag the dog of American politics for Trump. Is everybody wonders where are the Epstein files? So I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about next week. In the meantime, like I said at one point in this podcast, work collectively with other people in your community. You're going to feel a lot better about, what we're doing. And, you'll be a lot smarter because collective work is, you get mutual criticism and feedback. And so it's more effective action, and you're working with comrades. So you don't feel isolated, and, keep the faith, because we do win victories on various issues. And like I pointed out with that eco-socialist survey, uh, people want what we want. We just need to organize well enough to show them that we're a viable alternative. So, have a good week, everybody. Enjoy your holidays, meeting with your family and friends, and we'll see you next week, next Saturday, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, live or on your, on most major podcast platforms during the week.